Hello Year 9 and welcome to the third lesson in our English Literature Poetry sequence studying Storm on the Island by Seamus Heaney with me, Mr. Smith. Today's lesson focuses on the learning question, how does Heaney explore the power of nature in Storm on the Island? And to do this today we will be annotating the poem and then thinking about some of the ways that the language and imagery in that poem links with the theme of the power of nature. So please make sure that you've got a copy of the poem, that you're ready to highlight that and to make notes about it, because you'll need to do that throughout today's lesson. We'll begin with some vocabulary, and we're looking at, first of all, dramatic monologue, which should be familiar to you from Remains. It's a poem in the form of a speech by a single character, in which they reveal their inner thoughts, feelings, and character, as in the type of person they are, sometimes without meaning to. This poem is blank verse, as we've already discussed, and it is presented as a monologue by an islander. We'll talk a little bit more about the character who's speaking that very shortly, but remember that this is in the form of a dramatic monologue. The other concept I want you to think about and definition is of power, which might seem like a very simple word. You might think, I know what that means, but when we think about this in thematic terms, it's the ability or the capacity to do something, the capacity or ability to direct or influence the behavior of others or the course of events. And when we think about it in the scope of literature and poetry, well, power is one of the major defining factors of our world. The power of nature that shapes our world. Physical power, which can be used both for good and for bad purposes. It can make us feel strong and confident. It can be used to dominate and hurt others. There's the idea of power that comes from money, from wealth, and from privilege that allows you to do things that others can't and get away with things that others wouldn't. And maybe even linked to that is the idea of political power, to be able to control, to be in a position of power. What about the power of love? What about the power of emotion and of connection with other people? And, of course, military power as well, the geographic power of countries, their ability to project force. All of these things have been the subject of poetry for centuries. So the poem Storm on the Island is an imagined conversation. It's spoken to us by a character, and that's what makes it a dramatic monologue. And it's presented in blank verse, so it reads like something being spoken by a person rather than a false or artificial rhyme. The speaker's unnamed, and they seem to be a resident of the island, telling us what it's like to live in this place. The island's barren and storms are common here, but the speaker seems to be proud of their home. They speak of it very fondly. As the speaker continues, though, they seem to become more aware of how hard life is on the island and how isolated they are. And this is where the dramatic monologue elements really start to take effect, because in a dramatic monologue, we begin to learn things about the character that perhaps they haven't quite realised themselves yet. And here we come across the islander starting to realise that perhaps this isn't the paradise that they maybe first thought that it was. They begin to feel as if nature's at war with them, with the islanders, constantly attacking them and harassing them. And at the end of the poem, the speaker has admitted that they're often afraid on this island, though they're not sure what it is that frightens them. They're troubled by a huge nothing. So the poem takes us on a journey through this character's own ideas of the island on which they live. And in doing so, Heaney is inviting us to consider the power of nature. He's inviting us to think about the power that nature possesses. So what power does nature possess? And to what extent do humans control nature, or can we exert power over nature? Are we powerless against the natural world? If we think about big storm events, if we think about the world as a whole, despite all of our technology and all of our intelligence, do we really have any control? And then what is the human relationship with the natural world? Do we exist with it? Do we exist in opposition to it? How do we define ourselves as both part of nature and separate from nature? And these are very big questions, and we're not looking for answers so much as just to develop our thinking on these lines and using the poem as a springboard to be thoughtful and be interested in what the answer to these questions might be. So we're about to annotate the poem, and I'm going to keep these questions in mind as I do. I'm going to be looking for lines and words and images and phrases that really speak to me about the power of nature and help me to consider the answers to these questions. I'm not going to be looking for specific answers, just inspiration for ideas and for speculation. So I'll be making notes as I go. Get your pen and your paper ready, and we will begin. Okay, so it's annotation time with my copy of the poem here. I've got the tools that I will need. I've got my mini highlighter and a pen for notes. And I am looking for the power of nature. I'm just looking for any images, phrases, or interesting lines that Heaney might have used to explore those 4 questions that we talked about. And to start with, the first line, "We are prepared, we build our houses squat." Now that might not seem to reference nature straight away, but what are the islanders prepared for? They're prepared for the storm, they're prepared for the bad weather. And one of the questions was very much about humans' relationship with nature. So I think that that's really something good to start with, the idea that we are being prepared, that we build our houses in a certain way. It's a very confident phrase, and it's a declarative. We are prepared, a statement of confident fact. We build our houses squat, so this adjective that suggests something low, stable, maybe crouching, taking shelter perhaps. Sink walls in rock and roof them with good slates. There's more references here to the use of natural materials. This wizened earth has never troubled us with hay. So that's good on this wizened earth, first of all. So wizened meaning old, dried up, used up. So the island itself is not a hospitable place. This is not an easy place to grow food, that hay. But interestingly, the speaker says it's never troubled them with hay. And here, when I talked about the speaker having pride in their island, the use of the word troubled here, there's a sort of an irony, there's a bit of humour here in the speaker, saying they've never had to worry about having to gather in hay and crops because it's never been possible to grow it on this island. So he's, or she's, downplaying the island's bad points and actually turning it, maybe humorously, into a good point. So they really can't grow very much here, but that's okay. So maybe one of the ways that humans can have power over nature is by simply choosing not to let it bother us. Can't grow food here? Alright, fine, that doesn't bother me. And so then nature has no power over us. Maybe. Well, there are no stacks or stucks that can be lost. The idea that the hay can't be blown away by the wind either. Nor are there trees which might prove company. So this is a barren island, isn't it? There's no trees. Barren's a great word, by the way. If you don't know it already, pop it into your personal lexicon, your collection of words. B-A-R-R-E-N, barren, where nothing grows, no shelter. And the idea that the trees here might prove companies. So we've got personification already. There's a huge amount of personification right the way through this poem. And we've got an idea here of loneliness, that those trees it would be nice to have that company. It'd be nice to have those figures of those trees on the horizon, but sadly not. There's nothing on this island to keep you company when it blows full blast. When it blows, when the wind blows, when nature blows. You know what I mean. Now, I've always liked that line because it's as though that the person is trying to get sympathy or make a connection with the person they're speaking to. They don't want to be the only person who's experiencing this. It's a very human need to connect with somebody and to share an experience. So it's not strictly natural world, but I can't let that go. That's a really important point. So let's just put this here: the human need to connect. If you have a good idea like that, and it's not strictly related to the idea that you're working with, still make a note of it, because you never know when one of those little sparks might fire and you'll make a connection, and before you know it, you've said something really interesting about the poem. So make those notes, because you can't get any credit for what you don't write down, and you can't write down what you don't remember. Leaves and branches can raise a tragic chorus in a gale. So we've got the idea of the wind in the branches. We've got this is what it shows, of course, the sound effects, the rushing, howling wind. But then we've got the personification, the idea that these are a chorus, like they're singing, like a choir perhaps. And also we've got tragic here. So raise a tragic chorus in a gale. And so of course we've got the sort of negative or depressed mood of that adjective, so that you listen to the thing you fear. What is that thing that we fear? Well, it's the storm. But it's a powerful image, I think. It's intentionally vague. Maybe it's personal fears. The idea that in that isolation on that island, in that storm, that we're going to feel that loneliness and have to confront the fears inside our head, the things that worry us. There's nothing to distract on this island. Forgetting that it pummels your house too, of course. The idea of attacking, and we're getting towards the point in the poem now where the language becomes more violent, and the idea of nature attacking is going to become more relevant, so we'll keep that in mind too. There are no trees, no natural shelter. This is an inhospitable. How do I spell inhospitable? Inhospitable island. It's hard to live there. Humans have carved out a place. There's no natural shelter, so there's only man-made shelter. The power of humans in the face of the power of nature to create our own shelter. And if you want to link that to the idea of loneliness, that the only shelter to be had is with people, from other people, then we have an interesting idea there as well, that the only way to shelter from loneliness is by connecting with other people. So company and happiness is man-made. You might think that the sea is company, exploding comfortably down on the cliffs. We have an oxymoron here, a comfortable explosion. I've never been in an explosion, but they certainly don't look comfortable, and that power and destruction that they cause, there's nothing comfortable about that. But the sea is comfortable because it's a continuous, I suppose, natural process, the boom of the waves, day after day, month after month. The sea is comfortable in its routines, and it's comfortable because you hear it every day on the island. It's habitual. It is a habit. It is familiar. But no. When it begins, see, but no, and look at this caesura here. Remember that? Caesura. This is an important point. We're being stopped in our tracks and made to think about something now. But no, when it begins, the flung spray hits the very window, spits like a tame cat turned savage. And it's not comfortable anymore. It's powerful and aggressive. That the verb to fling, to throw, spray hits the very windows. So this is right against your house. This is local. This is personal, and spits like a tame cat turned savage. We've got our simile here. The thing that you thought you would trust, the thing that you were familiar with, is not familiar anymore. It is not. So unfortunately, we've just had to stop and rearrange the camera there because the zoom function started to go a bit funny. And I didn't want to miss out on all the notes that I've made so far. But we're down here talking about this idea of the tame cat turned savage, this thing that you thought you could trust that turns against you, that becomes violent, that hurts you when you're not expecting it. So it's unexpected. It's almost like a betrayal. It's unpredictable. And this simile really gets down to the heart of it, that it doesn't matter how much control you think you have over nature. Nature is wild. It's savage. It will not be controlled. This is one of the central images of the entire poem. We just sit tight while wind dives and strafes invisibly. So strafing is a very particular military term, and it refers to repeated attacks by an aircraft on ground targets. So if you've ever seen in a war film where a plane swoops down firing machine guns or missiles and bombs at people on the ground, that is a strafing run. It's an aerial attack. And the idea here is that the wind is attacking. So we have more personification. We think of the wind here as a violent actor, violent actions committed by the wind against us, against the humans there. And we carry on this salvo, which is a tightly grouped number of shots, another military term, MT. So if you were to fire several guns at once at one target, you would call that a salvo of shots. The idea that space itself, the empty air, is this attack, bombarded. You can see the word bomb inside that there, the idea of repeated attacks again by explosives with the empty air. So by the end of it, they are almost at war. This idea of violence being committed against them. And we end with this ambiguous line, strange. It is a huge nothing that we fear. And what is this huge nothing? Is it being nothing in the face of nature? Let's make sure we note that's ambiguous, but is it about nothingness? Is it that actually we're afraid of, there's nothing to be afraid of, that it's actually the natural world doing what it always does and we shouldn't be afraid of that? Is it the loneliness of our isolation on this tiny island in the face of the storm? So now we have our fully annotated poem, I just want to return to this theme of the power of nature, and as our plenary today, simply go back over the 4 questions that we asked before, but this time look back at your notes and try to think for yourself, make some notes if you wish, or perhaps just consider this. If there's someone at home that you can actually talk this through with, that would be a really, really good thing to do. That would really help you to develop your thinking. But now you have studied the poem in more depth, what power does nature possess, do you think, as we look at this poem, in terms of this poem? And to what extent do humans control nature? How is that explored here? Are we powerless against the natural world, or do we have the ability to take agency against it? And what does Storm on the Island have to say about that idea? And at the end of this poem, having read and studied it, what do you feel the poet is saying is the human relationship with the natural world? What do you think it is? Take some time over these ideas, hold them with you, think about them, discuss them if you can, and I will see you for our next lesson shortly. Thank you.